Alrighty. Well, go ahead and you can go ahead and turn over to you can turn to Exodus if you'd like to there. Exodus chapter 23, or and we're also going to be in Leviticus 25 and 26 today as well. We're going to actually jump around from a number of passages of Scripture because an interesting pattern develops concerning the things that we have to sort of cross over today. We're going to be talking about the Sabbath in creation. And these next few verses, as we continue through Exodus, our study in the book of Exodus, these next two passages or these next couple verses here are verses that speak directly to the Sabbath commandment, the fourth commandment, the Sabbath, that we shall honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. But there's a bit of a surprise with them. When we think about the Sabbath, we think about us doing no work on the Sabbath, right? We do no work, we keep it holy, and we've heard things like that, and those are absolutely true and absolutely good. But I think rarely, what we look at, or sometimes what we miss, is the function of the Sabbath in relationship to creation. Now we are created beings, so we're part of creation. So I mean, there's that. But the rest of creation, the broader spectrum of creation, if you will. But we're going to go sort of in a deep dive today on the Sabbath, because I think it's one of those commands that a lot of people don't really pay as much attention to. But we're going to look a little bit deeper into that as time allows. So we'll see. Well, here's the passage. Comes to us from Exodus 23, verses 10 through 12. It says, "For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, in what they leave it. The beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed." So there's the command. Now we'll go on. Have you ever heard these sentences or claims before? The fourth commandment: you shall honor your father. The fourth commandment: you shall honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, is the only commandment that is not mentioned again in the New Testament. How many people have ever heard that before? It's the only commandment that is never reiterated in the New Testament. This is often from people who espouse more of a New Covenant view of things. They will talk about, well, all of the 10 commandments, all 9 of the 10 commandments are mentioned specifically by either Jesus or the apostles or both, and they're given as commands, reiterated as commands in the New Testament, but the Sabbath is not. Yeah, go ahead.
I've heard mostly progressive churches like the Creed too. They say that.
They'll say that. Yeah. You hear that sort of evangelical churches and things, Yeah, so you'll hear that sort of thing said. And it's not untrue, depending on how strictly you define explicit commands, So it's, there you don't see Jesus saying you shall, In fact, we do see Jesus doing a lot of what?
Work,
doing stuff on the Sabbath, right? We see Jesus and the disciples doing stuff on the Sabbath, and catching a lot of flack for that from the Pharisees and other, religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, and this sort of thing. Have you ever heard the fourth commandment is fulfilled in Jesus? So Jesus is our Sabbath rest. Our Sabbath rest is Christ. That's a theological understanding of the Sabbath, the view of the fourth commandment, right? It's Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath, and so now instead of us obeying the Sabbath and keeping it holy, we look to Jesus, and He is our Sabbath. You ever heard that before? No? Really? Okay.
Usually with reference to Hebrews 4.
Well, yeah, exactly, because something along those lines is found in Scripture. Do you want to elaborate on that? Yeah.
Good.
Well, I know you can. I've heard your sermon on it. So no, Hebrews 4. Hebrews 4 talks about the idea that there is a Sabbath rest remains for the people of God. And as you work through it, what you realize or what you see it saying is that yes, you can derive this statement. It is not untrue that Jesus is our Sabbath rest. Absolutely. Okay, well that's not untrue. How about this one? Jesus broke the law, that is the fourth commandment, for love.
That's definitely from progressive subculture.
Anybody want to name a name there?
What did he do it for?
Huh?
What did he do it for?
What did you do? What?
Do you think Andy Stanley maybe?
Do something on the Sabbath.
No, this was the Elevation guy. What's his name? Skinny jeans guy. Elevation Church.
Starts with a.
I can't remember his name. I just remember like he was real skinny when I first saw him, but then he like bulked up, like he got on some weight gainer powder or something like that. Hit the gym. Anyway, is it Stephen Furtick? Yeah.
Oh yeah, there you go.
There it is. Couldn't remember Furtick.
And he's certainly not the only one.
Well, this is a direct quote from him. He said, that Jesus broke the law for love. It's like, wait a minute now.
Jesus broke the law. We have no salvation.
we got problems. Yeah, you can love all you want, but that's not actually love. Because if you love me, you will obey my commandments. Jesus never broke the law. Okay, so that's a heretical statement. That is a blatantly heretical statement. Now, to give him,
He did something on the Sabbath. Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, that's what he was talking about. That Jesus broke the law for love. That was his fire statement, right? Well, that's an untrue statement. Now he did go on to sort of qualify that. He was like, well, Jesus broke what they thought was the law, which okay, Jesus did that all the time. So the oral traditions that the Pharisees and Sadducees had handed down, Jesus sort of paid those things no mind, while he kept the law of God perfectly because God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. So anyway, so Jesus never broke the law, but this is still the same kind of mentality that sometimes these are quoted with. The idea that the fourth commandment doesn't really matter anymore. And so we are free to do whatever we want to on the Sabbath. And so do whatever you want because Jesus is your Sabbath. Go ahead and fill the day with whatever you want to do. I mean, yeah, you need to go to church. I mean, as long as Junior's not in baseball or softball or football or something like that. I mean, he's on a traveling league. They've got to play on Sundays. And so forth, right? So yeah. You can fill it with whatever you want because Jesus is your Sabbath. You can go worship whatever day you want. You can worship with your family whenever you want, and so on and so on and so on. You can worship out there while you're fishing, right? That's what my grandpa always used to say. Or no, he didn't actually say that, but that's what his generation was famous for saying. I can worship God out on my boat fishing. Well, yes, you can. I have no doubt about that. But we're talking about the gathering of the church, right?
And how does this compare with the Catholics who go to church every day? At least they're doing it in the church.
The Catholics go to church every day?
Individually.
Oh, you mean like they have services every day?
Not necessarily, but I've talked to a couple who go every morning because
Okay.
they think they need to. I suppose to pray.
Well, I mean, if you want to go and pray to church, that's perfectly
think-
fine.
I don't think it's
Yeah,
a whole church thing.
that's not but going to church is not the only thing you do on the Sabbath, right? So the Sabbath, if we look at the command, the Sabbath isn't just about going to church. The Sabbath is about setting aside a day that is holy to God. 1 and 7. So we're going to look at that here briefly because all this is really just sort of set up, right? So we've heard this kind of thing, and this is the mentality that the Sabbath doesn't really matter, and we see this among a lot of modern evangelicals. But one of the things that sort of grates against that is that the Sabbath, while it is reiterated in the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath is a creation ordinance. Now, are you familiar with what that term means? A creation ordinance is a law that God gave at creation. And if God gave it at creation, that means it applies to everybody, not just Israel. So the Sabbath was a pattern that God set forth at creation. That was to be a pattern not only for Israel, that was certainly the case for God's people, but it was also a pattern that God put into the fabric of creation for all mankind. It is a creation ordinance. So we see this in Exodus 20. This is where God gives the Sabbath regulation, the fourth commandment. And look at what it says. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you, your son, or your daughter, your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So he grounds it in creation. It is a creation ordinance. This word "for" at the beginning of verse 11 means that everything that comes before this rests upon this. It is based on this. This is the foundation. And then therefore, you're going to bless the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And that was a command of God for all mankind. So it was a creation ordinance. The pattern was set forth in creation. We can see Cain and Abel had a regular pattern of worship. Obviously, because Cain, church went bad for Cain one day, so he killed his brother. That was the first church business meeting. No, just kidding. So, Cain must have been a deacon. I don't know. I'm just kidding. Our deacons are awesome. Our deacon. So all of this is founded on this. This is the foundation for it. So it is a creation ordinance. Now, I'm not going to get into, because we really don't have time today, why we worship on the first day rather than the seventh. That changes. That does change as we come to the New Testament because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is a new creation, and so it is new. But we worship on the day that Christ was raised. So that I'm not going to get into the theological justification for that. We'll do that another time. Or if you want to chat with me or something like, or Pastor David, we will be happy to go into that. But what the direction that I want to take today has more to do, however, with the responsibility or the Sabbath as it applies to the world around us, the creation. Like I said, this is a creation ordinance. It's not just it's not just a creation ordinance, though. It is an ordinance for creation, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But the command to observe the Sabbath is based on God's work in creation. We've already seen that. Christ's work in redemption does not change that. No, it alters the day on which we worship because Christ brings a new creation, but it's still a creation ordinance. And so the creation now is based on the new creation, the creation that Christ builds. That is us. That is his church. But Christ's work in redemption doesn't change the fact that that we are to rest 1 and 7. So if we look at Exodus, look at this passage again, there's something I want us to see here. We have remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work and all this. Now, down here it says, on it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. What's up with the livestock here? Like I can't get on my horse and ride him to church? Well, evidently not.
They need to rest too.
They need to rest too. Yeah, so it's interesting that God includes livestock there because livestock, we understand the rest, right? Okay, so there's me, my son, my daughter, male servant, female servant, sojourner who's within your gates. It's interesting that wife is not mentioned there. Anyway.
It is. It is.
Did you say female servant? You going there? Okay. I was wondering if somebody did do that.
He can do that because Tammy's on it.
Is that right? Oh, she's going to hear about it.
Oh, yeah, she's not here.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, so that was a little joke. In all seriousness, though.
Levity for the lesson.
Yes. So
It was a training moment on what not to do.
Yeah,
The
Jess.
young gentleman in the classroom what you want to do.
So,
Yeah, watching church.
It's reasonable to conclude that the you is addressing all of the Israelites in general.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's addressing husbands and wives together. So anyway, or the sojourner within your gates. So so evidently the Sabbath law does apply to anybody who is under your sphere of authority or under your protection, who is a recipient of your hospitality, right? So if they're in your society, they obey this law. Whatever they do outside is those nations will be judged for them. So it is for the sojourner as well. But I wanted to point out, though, it is for your livestock. It's for your livestock, and that's crazy. I'm glad it doesn't say it's for your truck, or else I wouldn't be able to drive here. No, but in all seriousness, though, it is for your livestock. Livestock are not human. Livestock are lower than human. They're lower life forms.
Well, if you
Why?
look at today's verse, even the ground
Yeah,
is supposed to rest.
exactly. Well, that's where I'm going, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So why does God mention livestock? Why does God mention the ground? Why does God mention these things? Well, to get to that, we're going to go take a stroll on over to the New Testament. In Mark chapter 2, verses 27 and 28, that's what I have up here. But before this, to sort of set it up, what happens is that Jesus's disciples are walking through the grain field, or walking by a grain field, and they're hungry. It's the Sabbath, and so what they're doing is they're just grabbing some grain off the heads of the grain that's standing there. By the way, under the law, that was perfectly okay for them to do. God says you're not to harvest all the way to the edges of your field because that's to be left for people who need it, right? So the disciples are walking along this grain field. They're picking grain off the heads of grain. They're eating them. And there are some religious leaders there who see what they're doing, and they have a problem with this. And they're like, what? They're asking Jesus, why are your disciples doing what is unlawful to do on the Sabbath? So what is it that they're accusing the disciples of doing? They're accusing them of harvesting the grain. And that would have been, bless you, that would have been a violation of the Sabbath if, in fact, they are actually harvesting the grain, if they're actually reaping it, right? And so they get their they get their panties in a bunch there, and they're whining about it. I don't know, what are they? Sorry. And so they're whining about the disciples harvesting the grain. They're doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath. And what does Jesus say? He rebukes them. He rebukes the Pharisees. He says to them, don't forget the grain for just a moment. But Jesus rebuked them and says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. In other words, God didn't rest just so he could give us a rule to follow that would work to our detriment. God rested to give us a pattern to follow so that it would benefit us. That's what Jesus is saying. The Sabbath was instituted so man, who is oftentimes so wanting to gain so much and get so greedy and so get so ambitious for gain, will take a break every once in a while. And touch grass, they say, as the kids say these days. And smell the roses, as they said in my father's generation or whatever. You understand what I'm saying? But pause in your life, rest a little bit, set it aside wholly, remember God. So the Sabbath was made for man. It was made for their benefit. It was made for their blessing. It wasn't made as a rule to put you in the slammer with, to hinder you from doing that which is good. It's interesting that everybody talks about that. The Sabbath commandment was one that's not reiterated in the New Testament. Jesus actually interacted with the Sabbath commandment more than he did with any other commandment. He interacts with it all the time because people are blaming him for doing stuff on the Sabbath that they think he's not supposed to be doing. And he keeps trying to teach them. Look, and this is one of the teachings that he says. The Sabbath was made for man. So the Sabbath is a creation ordinance, but the Sabbath was made for the benefit of mankind. And Jesus, the Son of Man, is Lord even of the Sabbath. He can He can tell you what is actually lawful and not lawful on the Sabbath. In other words, this is Jesus saying, look, I know more than you do. Okay? I have more authority than you do. But we see that the Sabbath was made for man. It was made for our benefit. So Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Oops. That's the main principle there. Now, if we look over in Luke chapter 14, we see a similar event. But it's a little bit different though. It says one Sabbath, he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, and they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. They would put their foot in their mouth. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? So here's Jesus doing something else on the Sabbath. Jesus is just stirring up trouble. We see that Jesus, Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. And then we also see in this last passage that deeds of mercy and necessity are permitted. And let me get back to wait. Is that on the next one, or is that?
Those are very important categories.
Yeah. Sorry, I went forward too much. We'll talk about. I want to illustrate those here. So we see deeds of mercy, right? So the deeds of mercy here is where he heals the man. This man has dropsy. He needs healing. So Christ is merciful to him and heals him. That is a deed of mercy. So this is sort of like a medical treatment. That's why we have no problems with doctors in hospitals and pharmacists staying open on Sunday. That would be totally fine, even in a situation where there was an enforced Sabbath regulation in our legal code. That would be perfectly fine. So deeds of necessity are those things that are necessary are always lawful to do. We see also that deeds of mercy, deeds of necessity here. He says, which of you having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day will not immediately pull him out? Again, the son, of course, that would be a deed of mercy. But then we see the ox. I mean, we could leave an ox there, couldn't we? I mean, it's just an animal. But no, Jesus says you would do that, and that would be perfectly lawful because you need to get the ox out of the well, or you need to get him out of the ditch or whatever. You need to get the ox out so it doesn't die. And you lose that means of your livelihood. That is a deed of necessity. Now, you didn't plan for it to happen. It's not like you planned to work on that day, and you can then work your ox. No, your ox fell in a hole, and you had to get him out, or else he was going to die. So there you go. It was a deed of necessity. That again is a category. Yeah.
If you go back to what you mentioned earlier with Jesus' disciples taking some of the heads of grain, you have to eat.
That's true, but you could go a day without eating. But you're right. That would be a deed of necessity, getting food, right?
And it was minimally, it's not like they were fixing a 9-course meal or something. They were simply taking heads of grain and eating them.
Right. Well, we're going to see something else also that will apply to that in just a moment. But so remember the grain, okay? Remember the grain. Yes, grain. I'm going to get hungry here in a minute. Yeah, I found out yesterday that the McRib is back.
Yes.
At McDonald's.
I found that Friday night.
And I was, but then we had dinner already planned, and I was like, man, I want to go get a McRib. So I might get one of those for lunch today. So yes, I must defile myself, I guess, by eating McRib.
I can eat that after you eat what you make. Yeah.
Huh?
I mean, like, how can you eat one of those?
It's a
ribs
special
when-
treat. It's a once a year thing.
Yeah, and I know it's gross, and I know I'm gonna feel terrible after this. I totally understand that, but it's a McRib. So
If they had them year round, I probably wouldn't eat them.
that's true. That's exactly it. But they have
Someone
once.
will always say you're making the person serving you work. Somebody will always
Oh,
come
yeah.
up with that.
Oh yeah. Well, so we have the deeds of necessity, deeds of mercy, right? Those are the categories that we're looking at there. Deeds of necessity and deeds of mercy are always lawful to do. I've messed up my slides here, but notice the livestock are not permitted to work. We saw that. The deeds of necessity also include care for livestock. We've got a donkey or an ox as well. So deeds of necessity always include the livestock. Interestingly enough, and the livestock are not to work on the Sabbath.
it's gonna rain Monday, it's a necessity, I get my crops out of the field.
Today. So, yeah.
I'm just saying, I mean, yeah, I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, so I think,
Harvest
well,
Friday.
you know, so they may not have known, they may not have known how to do that, how to predict that far in advance back then. So they would have been surprised on Monday out in the rain pulling up crops. But you know, nowadays, you know, if we see rain coming, it would be better if we would have planned to do it yesterday than to do it today, you know. But you know, that is a deed of necessity, I would say. But at the end of the day, you know, we have the ability to plan ahead now, you know. So yeah. So now I'm going to skip back to a place where you may not see the direct connection yet, but we'll see it in just a moment. So why does it include the ox? Why does it include the donkey? Why does it include the ground? Why the created order? Well, this takes us back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. This is where God institutes what's known as the dominion mandate or the creation mandate. Sometimes people call it the cultural mandate, but this is the mandate. It says, God blessed them, that is Adam and Eve. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. You see, human beings, mankind, was put in a relationship of master over the created world. We were given dominion over it. We were to be the ones who created in the image of God, were to organize and to and care for the world in a way that exhibited God's attributes to the world. We were to image forth God into creation and bring order to it. In order to do that, God gives us authority over everything. Does that make sense? So you don't ever want responsibility without authority. God gives us the responsibility to make the world a Garden of Eden. That's what we were tasked with doing. And we were to image forth God into the world, and he gives us the authority over everything to do that. Because of that, because the world is under our authority, what happens to the world when we fall? What happens to the world when we sin? Well, it fell too, right? In Romans chapter 8, it talks about that we were the ones who essentially put this creation into bondage to decay when we sin. And it also talks about that this creation will be redeemed when Christ returns. It's going to be a new heavens and a new earth, just like we're a new creation already. And so the creation is included in Christ's redemption. The creation is included in the area under our sphere of authority. The creation suffers when we sin. The creation is also subject to let me rewind that. We also ought to, when we are trying to figure out how to live our lives in Christ, take into consideration all of creation that God has given us authority over individually. What do I mean by that? Well, the Sabbath is a creation ordinance and an ordinance for creation. This takes us back to our passage today. For 6 years you shall sow the land and gather its yield, but in the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat, and you shall do likewise to your vineyard and your olive orchard. Oh, good. We got time. What does this mean? This means that there is a godly way to care for the earth and an ungodly way to care for the earth. Better yet, there's a godly way to rule over the earth, and there is an ungodly way to rule over the earth. Now, has God given you authority over a certain plot of land? Yeah. For many of us, he has. We ought to govern it in a way that honors him. And there are certain things that God says to do and not to do. Here, when we see it with the Israelites, is that 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Now imagine that you do not live in the United States where you could go to Walmart or Kroger or Meijer and pick up food, whatever food you want. Imagine the only food that you have to eat comes from whatever grows out back. And now God is saying, and yes, the chickens. And God is saying, every 7th year, let it go. Don't do anything to it. Huh? Now you thought that planning for a rainstorm takes a little bit of foresight, right? We're planning on taking a whole year off. A whole year off and letting the ground just lay there.
There was a period of time where the farmers did that.
Well, I know they did. Yeah, obviously, there
They
certainly
didn't
were.
use it.
Why would God do that? Why would he make them do that? Well, because there is a proper way to care for the earth. And there's at risk of sounding like a tree-hugging greenie, there is a proper way to care for the earth. This earth that God has given us is a resource. It is a blessing. It is a tremendous resource. And yet there are ways. It's not just put here for our exploitation. It's put here for our stewardship and our management. We already manage it. We already use it. He did give it to us for our survival, for our good, for his glory. And there are ways in which we ought to go about, working the land that conformed to his plan for how the earth should work. Now you mentioned, Diana, and I think this is great. You mentioned that there was a time where farmers did that. They would
were
do that.
paid to let the land lie.
Yeah. So why is that even important? Why is it important? Yeah, go ahead.
Doesn't that have something to do with the nitrates in soil or like
Yeah.
nutrients?
Yeah, it has to do. Yeah, absolutely does. In fact, were you gonna say something?
The Dust Bowl.
Yeah, the
is
Dust
an
Bowl.
example of what happens when
Yeah,
when you farm too much and you don't let the ground have some rest.
yeah,
And then you let it go, and then it all goes.
yeah. And it just goes up in the wind in a whirlwind. Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in our country's history. Our country, a good portion of our country used to be just vast grasslands that were, 2 feet thick of topsoil. 2 feet. Now, nobody has that much topsoil nowadays. We're losing topsoil at the rate, I think I was reading at the rate of like 2 tons it's about a ton an acre a year. Just in general over farmland and things like that. Well, why does that happen? Well, it's because of our farming practices. We just keep pouring on more and more fertilizer, thinking that's going to take care of it. That doesn't actually nourish the soil. It does provide things for the plants, food for the plants, but the soil doesn't remain in place. The soil doesn't get nourished and that sort of thing. And so people know today that is an important thing to do. But here we have it in the Bible: the idea of letting your ground rest, letting it recover from what you've done to it. So anyway, so this is a creation ordinance and an ordinance for creation. Now we're going to go. So the Sabbath was made for man. Man is the ruler of creation, and man is to apply the fourth commandment in his management of his creation. This includes his livestock. This includes his crop rotation. This principle of Sabbath rest, it needs to be followed. And it's for man, right? The Sabbath was made for man. So really it is to the benefit of human beings that we would observe this sort of rotational thing, right? Especially in this early agrarian era, that would have been very, very important. You want it to be a land flowing with milk and honey? Well, treat it right. It will be. Now, let's look at Leviticus 25. This is a little bit of a longer passage. Somebody going to read Leviticus 25, 1 through 7. It says much the same of what we just read. It goes into a little bit more detail, though.
The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land. A Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap what grows of itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land. The Sabbath of the land shall provide food for you, for yourself, and for your male and female servants, and for your hired worker and the sojourner who lives with you, and for your cattle and for the wild animals that are in your land. All its food shall be all its yield shall be for food.
Okay, so the idea here is that you let the ground lie fallow. But if you planted wheat the year before, what's going to come up on that ground when you just let it lie fallow? Wheat. Why is that?
Because it goes to seed and it reseeds itself.
You're out there reaping it. It's going to knock seeds off the heads of and it's going to just come right back up next year. So there will be a yield in that field, but what are we not permitted to do with it? So there's stuff growing out there. What are we not permitted to do with it?
Harvest.
Yeah, we can't reap it. It says. Now the idea here is the reaping of it so that you can take it, store it, sell it, that kind of thing. We can't reap it like that. But what can we do with it?
Use it for food.
You can use it for food. And it's not the same thing as reaping. It's not the same thing as harvesting.
You're
So when the
still not
disciples
gonna
are-
get enough to survive.
Yeah, you're just walking through the grain fields, taking some off and eating it. And you can do that even when it's under its Sabbath rest. So the law bore that out. The Pharisees should have known and should not have said a word to Jesus. But alas, here we go. You're allowed to eat it even when it's on the Sabbath. Even when the land is on a Sabbath rest, you're allowed to eat it. Your animals are even allowed to eat it. You're just not allowed to store it, to harvest it and then store it in as you normally would on every other year. So it's getting its rest. It's not been planted. You're not harvesting it. You're letting it just. You're gonna go by, take a handful, eat it. Go by, take whatever you need for bread that day and eat it. But then when it's gone, it's gone. It's going to go back to the ground and be thatch or whatever, But yeah, so it's not. So what Jesus was doing wasn't even against the law of Moses, and the Pharisees should have known that. But Jesus, instead of giving them a Sunday school lesson, he said, "Look, I'm Lord. Okay, that's just it. We're gonna pull the authority card here." But yeah, so you're not to sow in your field or dress your vine. You just let it grow. You're not to reap the produce and store it. The land will provide food for you and everyone else. And you're not to kick people out of your field. If they want to come eat it, they're to come eat it. You haven't worked for it anyway, so whatever grows there is what God is giving you. So let them eat it. You eat it. Your animals can eat it. Whoever.
And there's a lot of stuff that God created that actually, if you leave it in the field
Yes.
and then till it under,
Yeah.
it actually benefits the ground.
It sets
puts-
nitrogen and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it pulls nitrogen out of the air,
Mhm.
puts that back into the ground. or
Absolutely.
Green manure, they call it.
Yeah.
And it's beneficial to the soil to leave it there, till it back in the spring.
That's absolutely correct. And
That would be the cornstalks, right?
whatever's out there, yeah.
Whatever's out there.
Yeah, of course,
The
like
bean.
Yeah.
beans especially, because beans are a legume, so they pull
Oh, yeah.
nitrogen out of the air and put it into the ground.
Yeah, that's why people started doing cover cropping and things like that, so that it'll do that even in the winter, and you won't have just bare earth.
Hairy veg.
Do what?
Hairy veg.
Yeah, there you go. I think my rabbits like that too. Sure would.
Yes.
So this is an ordinance for creation. Now here's the thing. We just read Leviticus 25. What happens though when you violate it? Leviticus 25 goes to Leviticus 26, and Leviticus 26 talks about, number one, blessings for for obeying God's law, and then curses for disobeying God's law. And I want us to see what Leviticus 26 says. In Leviticus 26, verses 34 and 35, this is one of the curses for disobeying God's law. He says, then basically what's going to happen is God is going to put them into exile to another nation. God says, you're going to go, and whoever doesn't die is going to be exiled into another nation. And then the land is just going to be uninhabited. And he says, then the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate while you are in your enemy's land. Then the land shall rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, the rest that it did not have on your Sabbaths when you were dwelling in it. In other words, God says, you disobey this law and you don't give the land its rest, I'm going to give the land its rest by killing you, putting you into exile. I mean,
Motivation.
hey. Well, if you read that list, like it talks about what's going to happen during the siege, And it says, you will eat the flesh of your sons and daughters. That's what's going to happen. If you and then the siege is going to be so bad. I mean, you can go ahead and read it. God gets very graphic about what's going to happen if they break his laws.
So that's where the government got the idea of letting the land rest.
No, I think they did at first. I mean, our nation was founded by Christians, so they would have known that sort of thing, and those practices would have happened even over in Europe before they came here. But when they got really greedy, then we have the Dust Bowl. Then we have, the kind of erosion of topsoil that we see today. This is Jeremiah. Now, fast forward to the exile, the Babylonian exile. Jeremiah says, this whole land shall become a ruin and a waste. And these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Then after 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation in the land of the Chaldeans for their iniquity, declares the Lord, making the land an everlasting waste. So God is going to punish Israel for 70 years, he says. 70 years, he's going to put them in the land of Babylon. Why is he going to do this? Well, because they've been idolatrous. They've been disobeying God's law. Well, what laws were we disobeying? Well, if we go on over to 2 Chronicles 36, it talks about this. It talks about why God allowed the Jews, sent them into exile into Babylon. It says he took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his sons until the establishment of the king of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, what we just read, until the land has enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept the Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. 70 years of Sabbaths. How many years did the Jews disobey the Sabbath regulation? Well, 1 in 7. So 70 years. There's 70 Sabbaths to be observed. 70 times 7. 490 years. Or we could say 70 weeks. But we're not going to get into eschatology today. So, interestingly enough,
Jared looks back at me. We agree here.
we had a little eschatology discussion last night. So that was fun.
I missed it.
A little bit, not a lot, but interestingly enough, this was the command that God, one of the commands among others, which God sent the Israelites into exile for disobeying. They would have had to disobey the law for 490 years in order for these Sabbaths to be now fulfilled, and that speaks to just the tremendous amount of mercy and long suffering of God. With his people. So anyway, we see this though. We see that the Sabbath is a creation ordinance, and it's an ordinance for creation. We, the environmentalists, unfortunately, in this world, happen to be the pagans caring for Mother Earth when they have absolutely no reason to do so. And of course, the methods that they use oftentimes actually make things worse. Windmills. Well, they're talking about getting rid of cows, right? Because cow farts, too much methane in the world. I'm not kidding. They want to see cockroaches instead of cow. Do you realize why we had 2 feet of topsoil on the Great Plains of the Americans? Because of the buffalo. The buffalo were out there pooping all over the place. They were being driven by wolves, so they're going from place to place, trampling it down and eating it, pooping. They were followed by birds that kept the poop clean and scattered it everywhere. So if we just do what God did and mimic it, we would have 2 feet of topsoil. It'd take a while, but we could do that. But no, we got to get rid of the cows, which is basically a domesticated buffalo. It's a domesticated bovine. So, or if you want to get buffaloes, put buffaloes out there. That's good meat too.
There's actually people that believe getting rid of cows.
Oh yeah. There are people today in Europe who are creating these big backpack mechanisms to capture cow farts so that they can bottle up the methane. I just write the mail. I don't write the mail. I'm sorry. I just deliver the mail. I don't write it. Sorry, I got my Bodhi Bakumism.
There are bison ranches.
What's that?
There
Oh,
are
yeah.
bison ranches.
There's even one in northern Indiana somewhere too. Then there are actually what is that park up there? Ubachi State Park. They have bison there. You can go actually see them.
They do. They have a baby one now.
They have a bunch of them. I was yeah, I know. We went up there this summer and I got a little too near to the baby and the mom kind of jumped up. There's a cage, but there's a fence between us, so I'm not really worried. But still, anyway, all right. Well, I think we need to get upstairs, but we ought to be the environmentalists, but in a biblical way, in a right way. We should care for God's creation, not born out of a Mother Earth mentality.
But it
and I
does say
think
the
the biggest
foreigners
thing-
and the slaves could go gather on the Sabbath
Yes, yeah. Well, they could gather on the land Sabbath.
land.
So the land was having its Sabbath, and they could go and take the grain and that sort of thing. So,
I think the biggest problem is that so many people have this mentality that the Old Testament is, we don't need to worry about the Old Testament because Jesus did it, so now we can do whatever we want.
That's
because
dumb.
Jesus, yeah, I know, and it's, you're missing the whole point.
guys, the law is for our good, and it's for His glory. That's why you see Psalm 119 extolling the law of God. It's not something to hinder our fun. It's something to magnify it, to magnify our pleasure. That's even it's it boggles the mind. You would trade that for the glory of the law of God. So yeah, let's go ahead and pray though. We'll get dismissed. We'll be dismissed and head upstairs. Father God, thank you, Lord, for your law. It is good, and it